All right, now we're rolling. Let's do this. Thank you, everybody, for coming here. It is a cold and chilly night, but at least it's warm here in the library. We are going to talk about what I'm sure is everybody here's favorite topic, public speaking. That's actually a much more generous reaction than what I was expecting. Comedian Jerry Seinfeld once said that he had found a study, and in this study it showed that the most common fear, the number one fear for most people, is public speaking. Number two was death. This means that if you ask most people, if they were to go into a funeral, they would rather be the person in the casket than the person giving the eulogy. So this is something that I want to just work on. I want to help everybody here tonight, everybody who's joining us online, try to work through that fear, to be able to come up, stand in front of people to give presentations or speeches, and to be able to give a good presentation, to do a good job with it. My name is David Lopez. For the past bit over 10 years, I've been part of an organization called Toastmasters International. And what we do is we help people develop public speaking skills and become more confident. So the first question we're going to tackle, and we're going to bring all that experience into talking about, is how do we overcome that fear? How do we get you past where you'd rather be dead than giving a speech? Well, the first thing to be conscious of is it's okay to be nervous. I want you to notice my wording I used here. I was very precise in it. We're overcoming the fear. We're not removing it. Because even with me, I've been doing this for ages, and I still get nervous. And that's perfectly all right. It happens. It's okay to be nervous. What you want to do and learn how to do is to control those nerves and control that fear. Where that fear isn't stopping you from what you can do, you can move past it and give a presentation anyway. And better yet, not show those nerves. The biggest way you get past that fear, and the biggest way you learn how not to show you're nervous, is prepare and practice. Take whatever amount of time is given to you and put the effort into planning out your speech, making slides if that's what you're going to do. Consider what you're going to say and practice it. You can do it in front of other people, you can do it in front of a mirror, whatever's going to work best for you. But take that time and practice, because then what will happen is you'll become familiar with the speech. You're going to know what you're going to say. So when you stand up here and those nerves are trying to get you, the speech is just going to flow out because you know it. I've seen time and again, both in Toastmasters where we're working with people and even outside just in different meetings and presentations I've heard. You can often tell when people are talking about something that they're really familiar with and that they've talked about a lot, and when they're covering something that they're not so familiar with or they're just not used to talking about. Because when they have that practice, it just flows. They'll talk about it, they come out, they're confident, their voice is loud, they know what they're doing. When they don't have that confidence in that practice, they stumble, their voice may tremble a bit, you'll hear a lot of ums and uhs and filler words. The practice shows. So take that time and put it in there because it's going to help you move past the fear. And the other thing to keep in mind is it's okay to fake it till you make it. Something I learned as a musician. If I'm performing in front of a group and I make a mistake, unless I show it, most of my audience isn't going to realize I screwed up. If I give some sort of sign to them that I made a mistake, then they know. And that applies to public speaking as well. If you can stand in front of the group, have a confident poise, project your voice, and sound like you know what you're doing, sound like you know your topic, and look like it, your audience is going to realize you're nervous. And your audience isn't going to be judging you either, because remember that study. What most of them are thinking is, oh, thank God it's not me up there. So it's okay to just come up here and fake it. Excuse me. So what are the keys to a good presentation? It comes down to two main things, really. What you say and how you say it. Okay, obviously that's very general. So let's dig into those a little bit more. We'll start with what you say. The first thing you want to do when you're deciding what you're going to say, what your speech is going to be about, is you have to decide what your purpose is. This isn't just the broad topic. Like tonight, I'm talking about public speaking. Public speaking, this is a very broad topic. There are a lot of things I can cover and talk about here. So when preparing this tonight, I had to take that large topic and narrow it down to the specific points and my specific purpose tonight. My purpose is I want to help you overcome your fear, and then I want to help you give a high quality presentation. I want to help you get started. That is what my goal is tonight. So what I'm going to do with that purpose in mind is take all the things I could talk about, and we're going to narrow it down to just the things that are going to help that specific purpose. Now, once I have that purpose in mind, the next thing I'm going to do is plan my speech. The best way of organizing a speech, best way of really organizing most things, whether it's written or spoken, you have an introduction, a body, a conclusion. Your introduction is how you lead off. This is how I get the audience's attention. I start off tonight with bad humor. Humor is a great way to get your audience's attention. Your introduction is how you draw your audience in, you get them with you, you connect with them, and it's where you present to them what your point and purpose is. And that introduction, then, when you define your purpose, this is what guides everything that comes after. Because for the rest of your presentation, your audience should be thinking, okay, you established at the beginning, this is the purpose, so now everything he's saying is supporting this purpose. From your introduction, you flow into the body, and that's where you build up that purpose. You provide the supporting evidence, you provide the interesting points that you want to use to persuade the audience. It's where you have the meat of the story, if it's just a storytelling speech. They'll typically be made up of your first point, second point, third point. And you transition and flow between them, and each one contains different information, perhaps a different scene or portion of your story. But this is where the meat of your speech goes. And then finally, you move into the conclusion. It's where you wrap it up. Now, when you go into the conclusion, there's something really important you need to do, and it's something I see people make mistakes with a lot. Your conclusion is what you're leaving the audience with. Any new information, new details, new ideas, all of that belongs up in the body. By the time you get to the conclusion, this is where you're taking all this stuff from the body, you're wrapping it up, you're putting a nice bow on it, and you're handing it to the audience to go do whatever they're going to do. Your conclusion is where you put in the message that you want your audience to walk out with. So now you've planned your speech, you have it organized, you're going to actually write it. I have found there are really three, this keeps trying to jump ahead on me. My mouse is a little sensitive on this laptop. There are three main ways you can write a speech. I highly recommend you stick to the first two. The first method is where you really script it all out. You write everything out, you plan it word for word, you develop your timing, you figure out what your gestures are going to be, how you're going to move around your stage space. You've got it all planned out perfectly. The next method is really where you just outline it. Here's a general idea of what my introduction will be. First point will be this, second point this, third point this. Here's the idea of my conclusion. The third method, which I suggest you avoid unless it's an emergency, is walk in, make it up on the fly, and hope for the best. There are times you're going to need to do that, and we'll cover that at the end. But in general, as long as you have time to prepare, I recommend sticking to the first two. I personally will actually bounce between both. I've met people, some are really good, they always want to write it out. Other people, they're outliners. They don't need to have it written out, they're perfect, they do great with just having an outline. I'm a person who does both, and find what works for you. The reason I do both is it really just depends on what type of speech I'm going to do. Tonight, with this presentation, I outline it. I'm presenting information that I know very well, so I don't really need to plan out my exact wording. All I need to have is an outline of the general ideas I'm going to hit, what my points are going to be, and then I can fill in the gaps when I present it. Now, at other times, I like to write it out, and that's usually for times where, if I'm, for example, doing a humorous speech or something that's involving storytelling, because then I really want to plan out my wording and plan my timing out, because I want to get the most out of every word and every minute I have, so I can get the maximum effect. So you find out what's going to work best for you and also for the situation. The next part here is how you say it, how you present it. You got your speech written, now you got to figure out how we're going to communicate it to your audience. The first aspect of how you say it is in your voice. Go figure, public speaking involves your voice. There are different components to this part. The main ones really are going to be your vocal variety, varying your pitch up and down, your speed, and your volume. Vocal variety probably has the most hard set rule, which is make sure you're varying it. As you go through, you want to convey different emotions, you want to convey different energy, bring your voice up, down to use the effect. It also keeps the audience interested, because if I were to talk to you like this the entire time, and I'm keeping the same pitch, not really varying this at all, same energy, same tone, not changing a whole lot, that's going to get really boring really fast to listen to. You may have some of your audience fall asleep on you. That's not a good thing. So vary your pitch a bit. With speed and volume, they're more flexible. You want to vary them, but they're also, you have to be aware of your extremes on them. With varying your speed, you can slow down a speech to make it more serious or to convey a more somber or sad mood. You can speed it up to build excitement, develop more energy if you want to be happy or really exciting. But you have to make sure that if you're speeding up, you're not talking so fast that your audience can't understand you anymore. If you go too slow, well, the audience is probably going to start to get bored after a little while. Similarly with volume, the most important thing is your audience, the entire audience, needs to be able to hear you. And similar with volume, a lower sound, you can be a little more serious, you can build suspense, you build your volume up, more excitement, more energy, surprise, whatever it is you want to do with it. But along with the audience needing to hear it, you have to be conscious if you're too soft, people can't hear, you're going to lose the back row. You're too loud, especially in a smaller room like this, well, some of your people are going to be covering their ears and not be happy with you at all. So adjust your vocal variety, your volume, your pitch to your speech and to your audience in the situation. The next part is your body speaks. It's not just your voice, your body does as well. And there are different aspects of this. The first one is your gestures. Make use of your hands, your arms. They can provide emphasis. If you really open it up, you opens up yourself up to the audience. It welcomes them in to connect with you and to be part of the speech with you. A few very common things I see newer speakers doing that you want to watch out for. One is they'll constrain their hands. They'll hold onto a lectern. They'll clasp their hands together like this. The really scary ones, hands are in their pockets. And you want to watch out for all these because all of them can make you look, there are things that make you look nervous. And this comes back to fake it till you make it. But they also constrain your hands where when you're doing this, you really can't get out there and make your gestures. And you also want to leave yourself open to make large gestures. This is the other common thing I'll see is that people get their elbows in really tight. I'll kind of move over here to make it easier for the camera to see. They connect their elbows to their sides. Sometimes out of nerve, sometimes just out of habit. And they're taking up less space this way. And when you're a speaker, it's okay to take up large stage space. But it also means they can only make small gestures. And they also have these very awkward Tyrannosaurus Rex arms thing going, which doesn't look the best. So if you disconnect your elbows out, now what you can do is your arms can stay in here if you just want the small gestures. But if you're doing something big and exciting, you can get your arms really far out. And this provides emphasis, it helps carry the audience through, and it helps you control the energy of your speech. Yes? Okay. If anyone does have questions, we will have time for questions at the end. Next thing is eye contact. Now, eye contact, especially in age teleconferences, has gotten interesting. In general, when you're presenting, always try to make sure you're looking at your audience. In a smaller room, especially, they can tell if you're looking around and you're focusing somewhere where the audience isn't. Now, all of you who are watching by the computer or video right now, you can't tell it, but everyone in the room right now can. But I'm not actually looking at anybody. I'm looking at an empty space where no one's at. So a good thing to do is look at your audience. If it makes you feel too anxious if you're looking them right in the eyes, you can get away with looking at the forehead, check out their hairline. Oh, look at that nice hair there. Because they'll still feel like you're connecting with them, but it'll be helping your nerves that way. When you're doing a teleconference or something electronic, what you want to do there is instead of looking at your audience, you want to know where your camera is and look right at your camera. Because what will happen is if you're looking at your audience is on a screen, which means they're actually slightly below or a bit above where you're going to be connecting with them. Because if you look at the camera, from their point of view, it feels like you're looking right at them. But if you're looking at them on the screen, now it looks like you're looking above them or looking below them. And if that's something you struggle with, I do too. We're all learning the art of teleconferences these past couple of years. That's been a very educational experience. Next thing with your body speaking is posture. This is really where if you're nervous, it's going to show. I mentioned with the elbows being tight in. That's a really big sign to watch out for. Or if you kind of slump forward, what you want to do, keep a good straight poise, elbows out. Find a way where you stand where you're going to be solid. It is okay to move around a little bit, but you do want to be conscious of how much you move. And it can be okay to use stage space. Now, since we're doing the video here, and we also have a lot of letters that serve as tripping hazards, I'm keeping myself in one spot, and that is perfectly okay to do. If the environment and the situation allows for it, and you're someone who likes to move around, that is something you can do where you can step out and go, okay, I'm going to talk over to this part of the room for a little bit. Hey, I'm going to walk over here now, I'm going to talk to this part of the room. And what's important is just make sure as you move around, you're not pacing. The best way to do it is, okay, I'm talking to this part of the room for one point. Now when that point's done, that's when I move. But you stay in one spot until you're through that one point. Another thing to be conscious of is how you move if you have nervous movement. Rocking back and forth, pacing in place. One of my mentors in Toastmasters like to tell the story. When he first joined, he had a habit where he'd give speeches and he would be doing this. Until one day, another person in the group came up to him and said, you know what? I need Dramamine every time you give a speech because you're making me seasick. So be conscious of that sort of movement. And if you need to, just adjust your poise, how you have your legs, to kind of limit your ability to move around. And finally, with how you say it, accessorize. Now, the first part of accessorizing is, of course, how you dress. Always dress appropriately to the occasion and to the environment. If you have somewhere you need to be more formal, make sure you're dressing formal. If it's informal, hey, they can get away with it, but it might still be good to dress up a little bit. The other accessory that you're often going to use when presenting are going to be your visual aids. PowerPoint is the big one. So I'm going to focus primarily on PowerPoint and similar software as I talk about visual aids. There are other very common ones. Sometimes people will bring handouts, they'll hand them out to the audience. They may have a whiteboard or a chalkboard or some sort of chart that they'll write on as you go. There are a lot of different visual aids you can bring. I'm just going to be focusing primarily on PowerPoint. The most important question to ask yourself, though, whatever kind of visual aid you want to use, is this. Do I really need any? There's a tendency where we just like to have some sort of visual aid, especially with PowerPoint professional settings. We automatically feel, oh, I am presenting at this meeting, I have to have a PowerPoint slide deck. And sometimes you actually don't, because your visual aid may detract from your presentation. It may be a distraction. So you want to make sure the first thing you decide is, okay, is this actually going to add anything to my presentation? So what kind of questions are there to help you determine, okay, do I actually need it? Well, the first and most common reason you're going to want visual aids is if the audience is going to need pictures, charts, graphs, whatever it may be, in order to understand you. This is really going to apply especially with technical presentations. If it's a business presentation where you're showing, okay, this is our profit and loss for the past year. It could even be, I'm going to tell you about my vacation this summer. The pictures can help your audience understand and follow you. And that then provides a visual aid that you both can refer to. And it helps your audience stay connected with you and understand what you're saying and where you're going. The next reason you may want to have them is if the audience is going to need a visual aid in order to follow you. This is why I have PowerPoint slides tonight. I'm throwing a whole lot of information at you in a pretty short period of time. So I have the PowerPoint slide going behind me, because then as I present, you have something you can look at, you can refer to keep track of where I'm at, to understand what I'm saying. And if you happen to get distracted and drift off for a little bit, you can quickly come back and say, oh, slide title is using visual aids. Here's the point he has up. This must be what he's talking about. And you can reconnect with him quickly that way. And finally, use visual aids if you just want something to make your presentation more dynamic and visually appealing. Now, I know I'm a handsome guy. You maybe can't tell it quite as much under the mask. But even with me up here, you probably kind of like to have something else to look at occasionally. And this is where your visual aids can come in handy. It's just something else you can see. You'll notice how, for example, throughout these slides, I have pictures on here. And they aren't something I'm usually referring to, but they just add that little bit of visual appeal. They add that little bit of just something extra and interesting to the presentation. Because most of the time, when you're giving a presentation, it's like a meal. What you say is the meat. That's the main course. Your visual aids are a garnish. They add to it. They're just something a little extra, makes it look nice, adds a little flavor. But they're not the main thing. You're the main thing. And the visual aid should just add something nice to it. So what are some other keys for once you decide, yeah, I'm going to use visual aids? What are the things you can do? Isn't that a nightmare right there? So this is a bad example. This is an example of what you really don't want to do. Because the first thing it's doing is it's really hard to read the text on that thing. When you make visual aids, everything needs to be readable. The text you have on there needs to be a size where your audience can see it clearly. They can read what you have written out. If you have charts or graphs or tables, your audience needs to be able to look at those and read every detail on there. Everything needs to be clear and understandable. So you create something like this, and it's just, your audience is going to get distracted and actually not hear you because they're struggling to figure out what's on that slide. And for that reason, basic is often best. This rainbow background here, it's really neat. It draws attention, but it's so much that actually would detract from the presentation because it becomes a distraction. Something basic like what you've seen throughout here, which is simple colors, basic backgrounds, there isn't a lot to it. It's really the best way to do it because, again, your visual aids the garnish. It's okay for it to be kind of boring. It's just supporting what you're saying. It's not really the main spot you want your audience to be focusing on. When it comes to the text and when you write out, stick to short statements. Generally, there are a few times where you may want to actually write it out and go full detail. But the vast majority of the time, just stick to the very basic ideas with what you write up there. Because you don't want your audience reading the speech. You want them listening to you. And it's again, up here, this is just a guide. It's walking through, hey, here's where our main point is right now. This is where I'm at. But you want them still listening to you to get all the details. And similar along with that, always remember, the slides are for the audience, not for you. What I see every once in a while are people who are using the slideshow as their notes. And so what they'll start to do.
It like went black for a second.
Okay. I probably stepped on the wire. What they'll start to do is instead of looking at their audience, they'll do this. And they'll be talking over here and they're reading their slides off because they need to know where they're at. And what happens when you do that is, first off, you lose your connection with the audience. You don't have that eye contact going anymore. You're not connecting with them. What also happens is they're going to start struggling to hear you because your voice is going to the wall first and bouncing back to them. They're getting an echo, not even actually talking to them. So you want to make sure if you're going to need some sort of reference, some sort of notes to work with, you can do printouts, maybe bring some note cards with you, or cheat. Put your laptop or whatever's controlling the slideshow in front of you, because that way you can look here, see what you're going to say, where you're going, and you don't need to look behind you. You'll stay connected with your audience. Some other keys to visual aids. Use them to control what the audience sees. One of the reasons I always recommend PowerPoint to people over using, for example, handouts, is because when you give people a handout, they do what a lot of you are probably doing right now. They read ahead past where you want them to be. So let's be honest. How many of you, show of hands, when I presented you with all three of these bullet points, read ahead to see what I'm going to talk about next? It's just a human tendency. You present us with all the information, we're going to read down and see what you're talking about. And as a result, I may still be talking about bullet point number 1, but you're probably looking at and thinking about bullet point number 7. So there are different ways you can use, especially in PowerPoint, to control what the audience is seeing and when they see it. Animations have been the main thing I've been using. If you're uncomfortable with those or not used to using them, another way you can do is just create additional slides. And on each slide, you just add the additional bullet point. You'll end up with a much larger slide deck, but it does do the trick. Find just different ways you keep control of that, because then whatever you're talking about, the audience is going to be with you and not being ahead of you. A really big and important one. Proofread and do a test run in advance. I was sharing a story with Paul before we began here. When I was in college, one of my classes, I studied materials engineering. In one of my classes, we were giving a whole bunch of technical presentations. The thing about technical presentations is the more of them you hear, the less the class pays attention to them. So by about the second or third person, the only person paying attention anymore to the people coming up was the professor. Which is why it then drew everybody's attention back when in the middle of one presentation, we suddenly heard the professor start laughing. This is a technical presentation. They aren't supposed to be funny. We immediately start paying attention again, and we realized the reason he was laughing is because on their PowerPoint slide that they had up, they had left a note that said, "Put a picture here, dummy." And they have forgotten to go back and take that out and replace it with a picture. So this is why it's important before you do your actual presentation, go through and do a proofread. Make sure you've taken all those embarrassing notes out. Make sure you have pictures where you need them to. And also, if you're using things like animations, do a test run to make sure they're working the way you want to. This animation, I had to intentionally show you all 3 bullet points at once. When I was first setting this up, I had to do a couple of test runs because there were slides where I discovered by accident more than one was coming up at a time. I had to go back and fix that before tonight. So this is why you want to do test runs and proofread. Now, even when you've done all your proofreading, you've done the test run, the last thing you need to do is just be ready for tech problems. The more media you use, the more technology is involved, the more different things you have that can break. You do a teleconference, Zoom may break down, you lose your connection. You've got to reconnect. You're using PowerPoint, your laptop might crash, the projector might stop working. Really fun example I've gotten to see happen a lot. You're going to bring a video up on YouTube, or you're going to play some piece of audio media, and the speakers aren't working, or it's not connecting to YouTube correctly. You need to be ready to know what to do if your media or your technology isn't working. It's okay to spend a few minutes, hey, let's try and get this working, let's correct things, reboot, whatever it takes. But the thing you have to be aware of is the longer it takes to correct it and to fix it and get stuff working, the more members of your audience you're going to have who do this. We all have a distraction in our pocket, purse, wherever it may be. And your audience is going to get distracted very quickly because, in a way, you're wasting their time the longer it takes to fix it. So scary as this is, what you really have to practice and be prepared to do is to carry on without it. If it's taking over 5 minutes, you're getting 10 minutes, and you still can't get stuff to work, best advice I've ever been given was given to me by my marketing professor when I studied for my master's. Always walk in ready to give your presentation without your PowerPoint slides in case they don't work. It's similar to if you want to have a video or whatever else it may be. It's scary because you do have to make it up on the fly then. But your audience is going to appreciate it, and they're going to be gracious to you because they're going to know, oh, this part of the speech wasn't planned. They planned to have something else here, and now they've got to just make it work. But they're going to be so grateful to you that they're going to give you some grace because now you aren't wasting their time. They don't have to sit here waiting for you to get stuff working. And it's at these times is where that third type of speech writing comes in. Making it up as you go. Sometimes your technology breaks down, you've got to make it up. Or I've had a situation, you call into a meeting, you aren't planning to present, you've looked at the schedule, this meeting is just something you can sit and listen to, and your boss says, hey, I'd like you to lead this meeting. And in point of fact, we're going to spend this entire meeting with you presenting on the project you're working on. When those times happen, that's where you need to be ready to think on your feet and just make it up as you go. But the great thing is improvisation is a skill like any other. It's something you can practice and you can learn how to do and get better at. How do you do it? This is just one way. It's a good way. It's a good way for most of us though. Stand in front of a mirror, or if you have family, friends, spouse, whatever it may be, who you can work with, bring them in. Find a topic. It could be something from the headlines. You could go to Google and just say random speech topics. It doesn't really matter where it comes from. And then talk for a minute or two about that topic. Because then what you're doing is you're learning how to think on your feet where something's been thrown at you, and you're just practicing that skill of talking about it on the fly, figuring out what you're going to say. And when you're doing it, use those skills I talked about of what you say and how you say it. Decide, okay, this is the specific thing I'm going to focus in on as I talk about this point. Try to have an intro, a body, a conclusion as you talk about it. And then use your voice, your body, all of that to make it a good talk. And you're going to develop that skill where you're going to learn how to just improvise and give a presentation on the fly whenever you need to. So let's do a demonstration of this. And how we're going to do a demonstration is I'm going to ask you to come up. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to do that to you. Do you have any questions for me? Maybe about what I've talked about tonight, just general public speaking questions. What questions do you have I can answer? Krista.
In Toastmasters, we do improv. And so what if you get a question and you know nothing about the subject? How do you fake it?
So our philosophy in Toastmasters then this actually goes back to that same mentor I talked about earlier. When you're just practicing the art of improvisation and learning how to think on your feet, this is a perfectly valid thing to do. When you're actually put on the spot in a professional environment, I don't recommend this. But when you're just practicing, lie. Make something up, and especially if you have somebody you're practicing in front of, this is even better. Because what you're learning to do is you're learning how to convince them that you know what the heck you're talking about. My mentor would always refer to it as our improvisational speaking. It's learning the art of lying convincingly. So when you want to practice those improvisational skills, that actually can be a perfectly valid thing to do. I actually once, when working with a different Toastmasters group, for their topics one day, when we were going to do the improvisational speaking, I got to be the person in charge of giving topics, and what I gave them were weird headlines. And they had to come up with what was the story that went with this headline. Now, obviously, they had no idea what the real story behind this headline was. You know, squirrels found with 20 guarding 20 duck eggs. They have no idea what the real story was there. But I gave them the chance to take something kind of weird and think on their feet and just make something up and have a little fun with it. And it is a good way to practice improvisation, and it makes it a lot more fun that way too. So other questions?
I mean, not so much a question, but just kind of building upon that. I do a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, and you know, leading those, you have to do a lot of improv. I was with a group where we would play a game where we would send one person out of the room while they're gone. We would come up with like some crazy topic that they have to do a press conference on. It would be like Leprechaun runs for Congress or something. So then the guy comes back in and he has to try to figure out what it is by our questions. And that was actually a really good improv game. So
that would do it.
yeah.
And the nice thing with that too is the same thing as, you know, just lying convincingly. You're developing an actual skill, but you're doing it in a fun way.
Yeah.
Because we don't want this to be something boring. If you're going to have to learn a skill, you want to actually enjoy doing it. You don't want to be the slog of, I need to practice learning to improvise again. It's okay to make it fun. And really, that's a similar thing with all public speaking. It's okay with whatever kind of, I'm going to correct this backspace and correct there. With most types of public speaking you might be doing, it is okay to have a little fun with it. Add some humor in, play around a bit, because that helps you connect with your audience. It helps them enjoy the presentation more, and it makes it more pleasant for you as well when you're doing it. Some other questions? Or question?
I have a comment.
Okay.
Since I joined Toastmasters about 1.5 years ago, I feel more confident being able to speak because when I leave the meetings, it's a good group of positive people who give constructive criticism or ideas. And so I think it's a feel-good night when I go to Toastmasters.
Thank you. Well, just to kind of bring us to an end here, if you do want to learn some more about public speaking, or if you want a safe environment where you can go in, you can practice, you can grow, we do have 2 groups in Dubuque that are open to the public, and you'd be welcome to come check out. Guests are always welcome. The first is the one that Kristen and I are both members of, and that's Speakeasy. We meet on Wednesdays at 5:30 p.m. at the Carnegie Style Public Library, downtown Dubuque, or you can join us by Zoom. Especially on a night like this, you don't want to have to drive all the way to the Butte into downtown, deal with the cold weather and the long drive. You can just attend from the comfort of home, and we're okay with that. The other public group is Talk of the Town. They meet on Tuesdays at noon. They're at the NICC Town Clock Center, also in downtown Dubuque. And they're also available, you can attend by Zoom. Public speaking doesn't have to be something that you look at and say, I would rather die than do this. It's a skill like anything else. And you can learn to overcome that fear. You can develop the skills to give great presentations. And you can become a great speaker who stand in front of people and feel confident. Thank you, everybody, for attending tonight. I will be here for a little bit if you have any questions for me, you want to come ask. Have a safe drive home.